My Renault ZOE turned 3 years old this week, so it seems an appropriate time for an update on how I'm getting on with it. I'll cover the issues I've had with the car, what I like and dislike about it, and whether I recommend it for other people. As I say, the car turned 3 this week, but that doesn't mean I've had it 3 years. I bought my car second hand, something I highly recommend to avoid large losses due to depreciation. Having said that, it wasn't very old when I got it. My car was an ex-Elmo fleet member. Elmo were one of the companies offering cars through monthly subscriptions. However, it appears that the car was hardly ever used, if at all, as it had only 700 miles in it when I bought it. Elmo seemed to realise that they had bitten off more than they could chew and offloaded a number of cars to try to reduce their cost base, although they would actually close the doors to new business within a year of that sell-off. This car was not quite what I was looking for. The Zoe has been available in a couple of blue colours. This one, called Celadon Blue, has a bit more green in it than I really like. I much preferred a colour called Zircon Blue, but that was discontinued in 2020, so I was forced to choose between the colour I wanted or the age I wanted, as I was hoping for something just a couple of years old. However, when this one came up for a very reasonable price, and having seen such little use, I decided to forego Zircon Blue and get this one. It was an as-new car, but for a small stain on the driver's seat and a bit of dirt under the front bumper, missed when the dealer prepared it. I like the idea of that, as I like to keep my cars in pretty good condition, as mark-free as possible. It was an added bonus that I know the history of the car pretty well, and that there was plenty of the full car warranty and connected services included. In terms of issues I've had with the car, there's not all that much to report. It got reversed into in a car park while I was letting someone out of a space in front of me, but we got away with that. It left only a small dink on the rear wheel, nothing to worry about. Something or someone has left a bit of a graze down the side, light enough not to deform the bodywork at all, but a few light scratches in the top coat remain, which I'll sort out when needed. And only a single breakdown in the time I've had it. Yes, I have had a breakdown, or at least an inability to drive it for a short time. The photos didn't come out well, but I got a puncture, a complete and very fast deflation. It needed sorting, but it happens to everyone. Besides that, all I've suffered is software bugs. I had one journey I've mentioned before when Zoe became convinced that the national speed limit was 40 miles per hour. Pulling over and initiating a quick reboot of the head unit fixed that. It has happened again once since that, but with a different speed, I think. The second time I rebooted the head unit on the move to sort it. By the way, you do that by holding the power button on the screen for 10 seconds, and it reboots when you let go. I was without the reversing camera for a day in March. That was a bit odd. I've had a journey or two when I've lost the reversing camera, but it sorted itself out after turning the car off and on again. However, on this particular occasion, nothing seemed to sort it. Not turning the car off, not rebooting the head unit, not even locking the car and leaving it to go completely to sleep. It looked like I was going to have to take it to a dealer to be sorted, but the next day it was working again, and I haven't had a problem like that since. It was a bit odd, but I'm not too worried. When it comes to likes and dislikes, I should first say that I look forward to driving the car when the time comes. That's saying something, because I'd very much fallen out of love with driving before I got it. I'm not a fan of sitting in traffic, and whilst that feeling remains, I no longer have the fear of overheating like I did in the old Smart 42s I owned. Whether that fear has merit or not for you is up for debate, I guess. But one of them did fail fairly catastrophically from a blown gasket, and the other one misbehaved after being cooked sat in traffic jam. So my concern wasn't entirely unfounded. I don't miss having a high pressure cooling system at all. An EV does have a cooling system, of course, but it's low pressure, dealing with temperatures well below the boiling point of water, so it's not likely to suffer an overpressure event. Furthermore, the car is doing very little when it's stationary, so there's no load on the cooling system in that scenario. That's a great weight off my mind. I find myself much less stressed if I do get caught in traffic. That's not the only thing I like about the EV drivetrain, of course. I love the way the drivetrain makes the car feel. Plenty of torque and lots of regen braking to boot, both of which I very much like. Being able to accelerate quickly can be very useful if you accidentally put yourself in the wrong lane. No gear changes, no delays or lag, just plenty of pull for as long as you need it. At least up to about 50, when it starts to tail off a bit. Although even a 60 to 70 mile per hour speed change happens pretty quickly if you need it. I can't imagine myself going back to internal combustion ever. That's not really a surprise to me though. I've always thought that an electric motor was the most viable form of propulsion and wanted an EV for my first car, but that was not to be. In those days, EVs were very hard to accommodate. There were a lot of compromises, but not anymore. For most people, an EV is a pretty simple transition, bar a bit of learning in the first month or two. Don't get me wrong, I think ICE cars are an amazing feat of engineering. Making something pretty complicated extremely reliable is very good going, but they are complicated, and I prefer an electric motor in many ways. The other things I like about the Zoe are perhaps little things, lots of small bits of pleasure that add up to a good experience. Take, for example, the inner charge flap. I watch lots of reviews of cars where the charge flap contains those horrible rubber bungs, dingle-dangling down, potentially scratching the paintwork each time you lower them. In comparison, the high-quality, sprung inner charge flap of the Zoe is a pleasure to use. Other manufacturers have a thing or two to learn from that. But not just that, actually. There are a few other lessons in usability to be taken from the Zoe. Take, for example, the lane departure warning. In the Zoe, I get a vibration through the steering wheel of the car if it thinks I'm slipping beyond my lane. Not a beep, something that might be mistaken for another alert, but a specific signal, one that cannot be misinterpreted, without the need for a loud or dramatic noise. Not only is it a much neater solution than many other cars, but it's super reliable as it happens. Lane departure warning isn't enabled on the Zoe unless it can be useful, so it's a safety system I really like, as there are no false positives. The car doesn't cry wolf and tempt you to turn the system off. It gently assists you when it can and stays out of the way when it can't. I fear the wheel shaker used in the Zoe may not meet the demands of the Euro NCAP requirements these days, or indeed the GSR2 safety regulations that came into force in the UK here in July 2024. But if that's the case, it's very much a mistake. Renault's shown the industry how to implement a great safety system, and others should really take note, including the legislators. For me, the seating position of the Zoe is very good. It is very Marmite. People either love it or hate it, but it works for me and my particular requirements, and I can get comfortable despite my niggling back condition. There are a couple of unusual decisions in the Zoe that make it work for me. Whilst the lack of seat height adjustment may trouble some, it's not an issue for me. But it also allows a lot of adjustment from front to back, more than most other small cars I'd say, as well as a lot of adjustment of the steering column. In a lot of cars, the steering column adjustment seems like a token gesture, but in the Zoe there is plenty of movement, meaning it might be able to cater for drivers of lots of different shapes and sizes. In that regard at least. Speaking of the steering, I realise I didn't mention the steering feel in previous videos. The steering in the Zoe is very light, as befits a car intended for city driving, which is probably where the Zoe was intended to spend its time. I don't mind that light steering at all, it's super easy to manoeuvre, but people wanting a sporty drive may not like it. Similarly, the suspension is pretty soft. Again, that suits me, but the car is not one that a person with a desire for extreme driving will enjoy. This is more about getting comfortably from A to B. look elsewhere for that sporty setup. There are a couple of things I shouldn't have to note that I like the round steering wheel and the indicator stalks. It's odd that you'd have anything other than those. They should be defaults in all cars, but somehow they aren't. It's not all good, however. There are a couple of imperfections in the design. Firstly, there are two aspects that keep people guessing. One is the rear door handles. I've had a number of people assume that Zoe is a three-door car, as they don't notice the door handles tucked up into the area behind the window. Even when they do realise the handle is there, they can't immediately see how to operate it, especially in the dark. The thumbprint of the designer is quite a clever idea, but it isn't quite obvious enough for people to spot and understand how the handles operate. The same is true for the rear seat belts. Zoe is very unusual in having two belt buckles on each side of the rear bench, and so it's common for people sitting on the left of the car to fail to buckle the belt, not expecting that only one of the buckles will work for their seat, the other one very different, and for use only for the unusual centre seatbelt position, in which the belt clips down on both sides of the occupant. That design allows for the upright of the benches to be removed to provide a flatter load area, which is an interesting workaround, brought on to some extent by use of space under the back seat for the cooling system for the battery. That's fine if you know these quirks, but if you're giving people a lift, you'll have to explain these little oddities of operation, suggesting that the design strays a bit too far from the normal for people to adjust to naturally. I don't mind either of these unusual design features, as I know about them and can adjust accordingly, but be prepared for occasional passengers to need a bit of help figuring them out. The slightly laggy inbuilt sat-nav continues to frustrate me a little. I've done a video explaining an important maintenance activity to keep it more performant, so I suggest you have a watch of that. I'll link to that from the end screen. But there's a second thing to learn as well. When you first switch the car on, the head unit busily connects to your phone and syncs contacts and recent call history. And while it does that, the sat-nav is very laggy. There are a few possible workarounds to that. The ones I use are either to send the address to the car from the app, which saves having to do a search in the car at all. But another one is to do the search before switching on the car, which avoids that particular period of slow response while it's busy with phone sync. Using Android Auto or Apple CarPlay are also options, although they are only available through a wired connection. But I still rely on the inbuilt system at the moment. I like the more seamless integration that comes from the car's own systems all talking to one another. My biggest bugbear with the car remains the fact that the back seats don't fold down flat. This is no longer all that unusual in cars. It doesn't seem to be something that manufacturers prioritise anymore. But when I'm moving lighting equipment around, it's quite annoying. As I mentioned earlier, Renault did provide the option to remove the seat backs, which is a nice nod to the problem, but that's not really ideal. Firstly, you have to do something with them once they are removed, but more importantly, that leaves the fabric of the seat bases exposed, and since I'm moving sharp metal objects around, that's quite a risk. I could manufacture a cover, something hard to protect against puncture, like a piece of chipboard or MDF. But then I have to find somewhere to keep it. Not to mention, remember to have it in the car when I need to do cargo transportation. That's the one aspect of the car that continues to frustrate me occasionally and makes me wonder if the Hyundai Insta might be a future replacement. The Insta is imperfect in a few other ways, and I can't justify replacing the Zoe at the moment anyway. But it is a thought that creeps into my mind when I'm daydreaming. The one thing that might cause a change in car at some point, although sometime in the distant future. There's one other thing I have to bear in mind when planning to use the car more heavily, and that's the fact that I cannot carry 5. This is something the car would normally manage, but a downside of the front seat sliding back far enough to be comfortable for me, yet leaving almost no room behind it. That's not a problem everyone will suffer, of course, and I don't want a bigger car to overcome this limitation, not at all. However, the sliding rear seats in the Insta sure do seem like a good idea, something that more cars should offer. The flexibility it affords if you can trade passenger space for cargo space would be very handy, at least for me. That's a note to myself for the future, albeit a distant future, all being well. And speaking of well, how is the car holding up? Well, fine. It sailed through its MOT, as you would expect from any 3-year-old car, especially a relatively low mileage one. I've only just reached 18,000 miles on the clock, partially because of those early months of its life when the car wasn't being used. So other than the puncture, everything is pretty rosy. The high voltage battery is all good, with a state of health of 96.4%. That's exactly what I'd expect for a 3-year-old car with average mileage. The rule of thumb I work to is 2% degradation in the first year, followed by 1% in subsequent years. It might be a bit higher for higher mileage cars, but figures I've seen suggest calendar aging is the most significant aspect of degradation in most makes and models. I don't have any concerns regarding the high voltage battery, and neither should anyone else, at least not on a car with a decent thermal management system. Degradation is a bit of an issue in the Leaf, but total failures in any EV are pretty rare, and certainly so in the Zoe. I don't know of any battery failures on that. That's not to say there haven't been any, but it's uncommon enough for it not to be something that spreads through the rumour mills or get used as propaganda against EVs. My long-term average efficiency reset itself in August last year. I think that was a bug in the head unit, but it might have been finger troubles perhaps. Either way, it's currently showing 3.9 miles per kilowatt hour. Quite a lot of my driving is at higher speeds. A fair proportion of the mileage I do is on motorways, although I do keep my speed at about 63 miles per hour most of the time, as that's a nice compromise between making progress and getting good efficiency. Before it reset, the long-term average for the car was showing 4.0 miles per kilowatt hour, and I would expect it to rise back to that again in the next couple of months, but only time will tell. An efficiency of exactly 4 miles per kilowatt hour makes some maths easier occasionally, and the more efficient the car is, the cheaper it is to run. Last time I checked, the Zoe was costing me 4.1 pence per mile, a combined figure from home and public charging. Whilst public charging rates are on the increase again at the moment, especially in the UK, I tend to be seeking out the cheaper networks and using my Octopus Electroverse RFID card to get the savings that can offer me. So I think it's unlikely to be costing me more than that calculation from a year ago. There's not much update to the range of the car that I've been seeing. I think the average remains about 200 miles across the year. It may have been brought down a bit this year by a very wet winter. It drops to about 165 miles in winter, perhaps 160 miles if it's especially cold, and goes up above 220 miles in summer. That's about a 25% drop from best to worst. That fits with the mental picture I hold, expecting a 25% drop for a car with a heat pump and about a 33% drop for a car without a heat pump. That 7 to 8% difference to the winter range is what a heat pump brings to an EV. So as ever, I think it's worth bearing that in mind. Think carefully whether paying extra for a heat pump is worthwhile. Sometimes it's a big cost difference for quite a small number of miles improvement, certainly on a new car. The maths might differ on the second-hand market, but think that through when looking at prices. All Zoes come with a heat pump, but that's not true of a lot of other makes and models, which is why it's worth thinking about if you are considering the Zoe against anything else. It is nice to have, but maybe consider just how much that range difference really matters in the winter. One more thing to touch on might be the DC rapid charging speed of the Zoe. This ZE50 comes with DC rapid charging, but it is an option, which I highly recommend you look for if you are considering getting one. Even if you don't think you need it, someone who buys it off you in the future probably will, So you protect your investment the best by getting a car with it, which takes care and attention to detail. The maximum DC rapid charging speed of the Zoe is one of the lowest of cars on the market at 46 kilowatts, with only the Dacia Spring lower as far as I'm aware, at least for cars and not things like quadricycles and motorbikes. However, that speed's not caused me much of a problem. While I do public charge the car quite frequently, each session is generally pretty short, as I don't need much energy to get home. As a result, a slow charging speed is actually an advantage to me. Public charging is so expensive that I want to minimise what charge I add, and so a slow charging car allows me time for a comfort break on a stop without the expense of adding more charge than I need or having to wait before having the comfort break. However, your needs might be different, so bear in mind that long road trips will take a bit longer in a Zoe, perhaps as much as 20 to 30 minutes more per stop than other cars, which offer higher charging speeds. However, I would bear in mind that the maximum DC rapid charging rate in kilowatts isn't everything. Some cars hit a high rate, but sustain it only for a few minutes, so look at charging time 10 to 80% when comparing specs between cars. Even better, use the average charging speed in miles per hour added, if you can find that. This corrects for both differences in the size of the batteries and the efficiencies of the cars. These values are usually available from EV Database for this sort of comparison. I recommend using that in buying decisions. I talked earlier about potential battery concerns and said there weren't any. Whilst the battery isn't a problem on the Zoe, it is becoming apparent that the car does have some reliability issues of concern. Unfortunately, this video is already pretty long, and I'm running up against time to feed the YouTube algorithm with this week's nourishment. So I'm going to go into the specifics of those concerns in a separate video, as it's a topic worthy of some significant consideration. However, I can summarise by saying that there are now two topics you need to understand in more detail before settling on buying a Zoe. One is the Euro NCAP safety rating, and I've already done a video on that. I'll link to that from the end screen. But the second is reliability, which is now a concern to some extent. I don't think either of these sound a death knell for the Zoe, but they are something you need to understand as part of a buying decision. Watch out for the details on the reliability concerns in our upcoming video, hopefully next week, and maybe subscribe if you want to see that. But that's it for this week. Thanks very much for joining me. Your questions and comments are most welcome in the appropriate section. I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. Have you got a Zoe at the moment? And if so, how are you getting on with it? If you're looking to get one, what are you comparing it against? If you've liked the video, then it's a big help to me if you click the thumbs up button, and I'd love to have you as a subscriber if you want to see more from me. Thanks.